The scent hit me before my eyes even opened. It wasn't mine. Floral and musky, the kind of perfume Elise used to wear when we were teenagers, trying too hard to be women. I hadn't smelled it in years, but memory is cruelly precise when it wants to be. I blinked at the ceiling for a moment, my body stiff beneath the weight of that realization. Then I turned my head to the left. Daniel wasn't in bed. Only his imprint remained, pillowed and warm, the sheets barely disturbed. But the scent lingered, dancing faintly on the pillowcase like a whisper that wasn't meant for me. I sat up slowly, as if the room might shift if I moved too fast. My robe was draped across the foot of the bed, exactly where I left it. But the hem looked off, wrinkled in a way it shouldn't be. It wasn't just the scent. It was the hush in the house. That loaded kind of quiet that tells you something happened when you weren't looking. I went to the kitchen. Nothing. Coffee pot untouched. The patio door was closed. Everything normal. Everything wrong. And then, when I bent to pick up a stray throw pillow from the floor by the couch, I saw it. A bracelet. Silver. Thin. Delicate. Not mine. Too small for my wrist. Too feminine even for Daniel's taste. Elise used to wear something, just like it. I remembered the way it would dangle when she'd flick her hair back, how it would catch the light at family dinners when she reached for the wine. I held it between my thumb and forefinger like it was made of glass. Something inside me went very still. There had been moments before this. Small ones I brushed aside. A hesitation in Daniel's eyes when I talked about Elise. The way he once corrected me when I misquoted something she'd said. And Elise, always showing up dressed a little too nice for our just us dinners. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was projecting. But this wasn't imagination. This was metal and scent and silence. I stood frozen in the middle of our living room, bracelet clutched in my hand, while our dog curled asleep in the corner. I looked at the framed wedding photo on the mantel, the one where Daniel's arm was wrapped around me, and I looked like I belonged. I didn't. Not anymore. I didn't ask him about the bracelet that evening. I didn't accuse. I didn't cry. Instead, I waited until he fell asleep beside me, breathing heavy with the weight of his perfect lies. Then I slipped out of bed and opened the laptop in the study. Our security camera footage saved to a cloud server. He'd insisted on installing them. For safety, he'd said. Just in case. I clicked through the timestamps. Hours of nothing. Just walls, doors, silence. Then, at 12:48 p.m. that Monday, the front door opened. Elise, my sister, wearing my robe, hair up in a messy bun, no bra. She kicked her shoes off with the ease of someone who lived there. I didn't see him kiss her, didn't see them touch. But I didn't need to. The way he looked at her when he handed her a cup of coffee. The way she slid onto the counter and laughed at something he said. The way he stood between her knees like it was the most natural thing in the world. My breath snagged in my throat. He cooked for her. In our kitchen. She laughed like she used to laugh at me when we were kids, and she knew something I didn't. There was no guilt. No hurry. No shame. They didn't expect me to find this. I closed the laptop gently. My hands were trembling, but my face felt numb. I looked at the bracelet again, still in my palm. The same silver catching the glow of the desk lamp. It was small. Dainty. Pretty, like the betrayal itself. And I realized, the worst kind of cheating isn't the loud kind. It's the kind done with soft voices and quiet smiles. In daylight. In your robe. In your home. That's when I knew this wasn't a story of heartbreak. It would be a story of revenge. 10 years ago, I stood barefoot in the kitchen of my little Seattle apartment, a mug of peppermint tea in my hand, and a diamond ring in the other. Daniel had just proposed, on the balcony, in the rain, with a speech about building a life together. I said yes before the question even fully left his mouth. At the time, I thought that moment was the start of everything. Now I understand, inside was the beginning of slow erosion. I gave notice at my design firm 2 weeks later, sold most of my furniture, left behind a rent-controlled apartment I'd painted myself, wall by wall, in soft hues and layered light. My career had just started to blossom. 2 boutique hotels had quoted me for freelance work. But I let it all go. Daniel got a promotion in Ridgewood, and I followed him. Into suburbia, into house hunting and HOA meetings and cocktail parties, where I smiled like wallpaper and laughed when I didn't feel like it. We bought a house with crown molding and a garden that I planned myself. Every brush of paint, every fabric swatch, every lamp placement, I did it. I remember telling myself it was a home built on love. Now it feels like I constructed my own prison with impeccable taste. I took his last name. It looked sharp on invitations and was easier to spell than mine. I gave up my own name like it was a price for love. I didn't even flinch at the time. I started wearing pencil skirts because he liked how they flattered my shape. Stopped wearing red lipstick because he said it distracted from my eyes. I cut my hair short once. He hated it. I grew it out again. When people complimented our home, he took the credit, smiling modestly like he had anything to do with the marble backsplash or the curated bookshelf. I let him, because I thought that was what wives did. Let their men shine, and then there was Elise, my younger sister, a whirlwind in human form. She dropped out of college 3 times, started a photography business, then a yoga studio, then a van life blog. She always called me the stable one, said it with a twinge of envy. I pretended not to envy her back, for her fire, her freedom, the way she walked into a room like she didn't need to be approved of. She stayed with us once after a bad breakup. 2 weeks turned into 3. She wore my clothes, drank wine straight from the bottle, and sunbathed on our deck like it belonged to her. Daniel called her reckless, said she didn't respect boundaries. He joked about how different we were. You build things. She burns them down. I defended her, told him she just needed time to grow, that she was healing. But now, looking back, I see it all more clearly. I see how his eyes lingered on her when she laughed too loud at dinner. I remember how she hugged him a little too long when she left. I thought I was imagining it. I told myself not to be insecure, but insecurity isn't always irrational. Sometimes it's intuition wearing a disguise. And there were other signs too. Subtle, almost polite. He started brushing off my ideas in front of his colleagues. Made a joke about me redecorating everything to death when I suggested redoing the den. He was colder in bed, quick to sleep, quicker to leave in the morning, but warm at parties, always warm in public, the kind of affection that photographs. Well, I don't know exactly when I began to shrink, but I did. I stopped drawing. I stopped painting. My sketchbook collected dust in the back of the hall closet, behind old towels and unused linens. I became his wife before I realized I had stopped being me. And the tragedy wasn't just that he cheated. It was that I gave him everything, my time, my energy, my loyalty, and he handed the intimacy I built over a decade to my sister like it was his to give. Now, standing here, holding that bracelet, I feel a strange kind of grief, not just for the marriage or the betrayal, but for the girl I used to be, the one with chipped nail polish and wild design dreams, who drank peppermint tea on a rainy balcony and believed in beginnings. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and polished silver. I'd spent the morning arranging sunflowers in the ceramic vase my mother gave me on our first anniversary, the one with the faint crack that somehow never widened. It sat in the center of the table, stubbornly intact, like it still believed in things staying whole. The dinner was Daniel's idea, a small anniversary celebration with close family. He said it would be good for us, something simple and grounding. I wore the navy dress he once called stunning without trying. I even curled my hair. Looking back, I think I wanted to believe we were still worth dressing up for. Elise was late, of course. She always made an entrance. I heard her heels first, then her laugh, loud, unapologetic. She swept into the room wearing a silk blouse and high-waisted slacks, like a woman auditioning for the role of elegant disruptor. And around her neck was the necklace, the thin gold chain, the tiny sapphire drop. The one Daniel gave me for our second Christmas together. When he said it reminded him of my eyes, my hand went instinctively to my own bare collarbone. I thought I lost that, I said before I could stop myself, pointing. Where did you get that necklace? Elise's smile faltered for just a moment, barely a second, but I caught it. That flicker of nerves before she schooled her face into nonchalance. Oh, she said lightly, I thought it was mine. Found it in one of my bags from last time I stayed here. Lies wear perfume, too. Faint, flowery, and just strong enough to linger. No one else at the table noticed. Daniel poured more wine. My father told a story about his bad knee. The conversation moved on, but I didn't. I sat through the rest of that dinner like I was made of glass, trying not to crack, trying not to breathe too hard. Every time Elise laughed at one of Daniel's jokes, it felt like another hairline fracture through my ribs. After the last guest left, I cleared the plates in silence. Daniel flipped through TV channels like it was any other Sunday night. I waited until the dog curled up in the corner and the dishwasher hummed softly. Then I asked, "Where did she really get the necklace, Daniel?" He looked up, remote still in hand. "What are you talking about?" "Elise. The necklace you gave me. The one that's apparently hers now." He sighed. That heavy, masculine sigh that men use when they're about to rewrite history. "She probably found it somewhere. Maybe you left it in a drawer." "She found it in my drawer?" He didn't answer. He just set the remote down, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and muttered, "You're doing this again." Doing what exactly? Making drama out of nothing. And just like that, I became the hysterical wife in his story. I stared at him. This man I had once let trace every inch of my skin, whose dreams I painted into the walls of our home, and I felt something unravel inside me. "You gave her that necklace," I said quietly. He didn't deny it. He didn't confess either. Not at first. He pivoted. Told me I hadn't been myself. That I'd been cold, distant. That I focused too much on the house, on making things look perfect. That Elise listened. To him. Understood him. "She doesn't make me feel like a disappointment," he said, not even looking at me. It wasn't even the words. It was the ease with which he said them, like it was a reasonable excuse, like betrayal made sense if the wife got a little too quiet. He didn't apologize. He justified. And the thing that gutted me wasn't the affair. It was the casualness of it. How familiar it already was to him. How comfortably he sat with the knowledge of what he'd done. I slept in the guest room that night, curled up under a throw blanket that still smelled like lavender from the last time I washed it. The ceiling fan above me spun like a carousel of every memory I didn't want anymore. Our wedding day. The first night in our new house. The time we repainted the guest bathroom and he kissed me with paint on his lips. All of it felt foreign now. Like watching someone else's life. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen to make coffee and found a crisp white envelope on the counter. Inside was a business card. His lawyer. family law. Nothing else. Not even a note. Just that sterile, hollow little card, sitting on the marble countertop I had chosen, next to the espresso machine I bought him for his birthday. That was how he did it. He cheated, then handed me the logistics of being discarded. He wanted to split things amicably, to keep it respectful. He even suggested we work out a visitation schedule for the dog. I stood there, holding that card, while my reflection in the microwave door stared back at me like someone I didn't recognize. My home was no longer mine. My marriage was a ghost. And my sister, my blood, was draped in the remnants of everything I gave away. I spent that night on the guest room floor, too numb for tears. The throw pillow beneath my head was stiff, and the air smelled like old linen and lemon cleaner. And that's when it clicked. I wasn't going to cry anymore. Not over him, not over her, not over the life I gave up to make someone else feel whole. Wouldn't go down quietly. I didn't pack with logic. I packed with instinct. 3 pairs of jeans, my softest sweater, the old portfolio I hadn't opened in years, a tin of tea. The perfume I stopped wearing because Daniel said it gave him headaches, and the bracelet, hers, now mine again, buried at the bottom of my bag like a secret I wasn't ready to part with. The drive north was a blur of bare trees, AM radio, and a silence so heavy it felt like it might split the windshield. I don't remember what I thought about. Probably nothing. Probably everything. The cabin sat near the edge of Lake Albright, nestled between weeping pines and silence. It had belonged to my mother's sister, Aunt Lillian, a painter who died before I turned 20. She left the cabin to me in her will. I never found time to visit. Now, time was all I had. The key stuck in the lock, like the place wasn't ready to let anyone back in. But the door opened, and the scent of cedar and dust and old books folded around me like a forgotten embrace. The air was cold and smelled like damp wood and ghosted dreams. The living room was frozen in the 90s, knitted, throws, shelves full of poetry books, yellowing watercolor sketches hung slightly crooked on the walls. I dropped my bag and stood in the doorway for a long while, like I needed permission to enter the next chapter of my life. I slept for 2 days. Not well, but deeply, as if the exhaustion I had carried for years had finally found a place to lie down. The room I chose had yellow curtains. They swayed with every gust of wind from the cracked window, their fabric thin and sun-faded, like they had nothing left to hide. I didn't cry anymore. I just existed, ate toast, walked barefoot across the creaky wood floor, watched the lake shift moods by the hour. Eventually, I wandered into the attic. It was warmer up there than I expected, sunlight spilling through the small round window like gold, syrup. I found boxes I hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside were my college sketchbooks, fabric samples, color palettes on stiff cardstock, my old world in layers of dust and potential. One sketch caught me off guard. A small bedroom with a bay window and yellow curtains, drawn in soft pastels. I must have dreamed it before I ever saw it. Before life rerouted me into someone else's orbit. I taped it on the wall beside the bed. A reminder of the girl who dreamed spaces into existence. Healing didn't arrive in fireworks. It came in inches. A neighbor named Beth needed help walking, her labradoodle. The local cafe needed someone to cover a few shifts. I said yes without thinking, and the rhythm of doing, the small human things, began to rebuild me. I repainted the kitchen, mint green, the same shade as the swatch I once fought Daniel over when he said it was too loud. I painted it anyway, alone, while humming a song I didn't recognize but knew in my bones. And then, one cloudy afternoon, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. There they were, Elise and Daniel. Standing barefoot in the sand, dressed in pale linen, holding flutes of champagne at what the caption called a family friend's wedding. She wore a thin silk dress, and on her left hand, my grandmother's ring. The ring that used to sit in a velvet box on my dresser. The ring I once wore on a chain for something old at my wedding. The caption read, "New beginnings." 2 words that used to mean hope. Now they tasted like rot. I stared at the photo for a long time, not with tears, not even with shaking hands, but with a calm so cold it almost frightened me. They hadn't just broken me. They'd stolen the parts of me they thought I wouldn't miss. The jewelry, the memories, my family's history, my sense of place. But I remembered something Aunt Lillian once told me, years ago, after one of Elise's teenage tantrums. Some people borrow your light, others take your whole fire and call it warmth. That night, I wrote for the first time in years, a list, names, dates, accounts I still had access to, emails, passwords, every flicker of memory that might one day become proof. My pain had turned quiet, and quiet pain is the kind that plans. Something in me had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with lightning or a declaration. It was quiet, like a locked door inside me had finally clicked. Open. I stopped deleting their emails. I stopped avoiding the paperwork, the notifications, the financial statements I used to leave unopened in a drawer labeled his responsibility. I read them now, carefully, like they were evidence, because they were. I found inconsistencies. First, small things. A dip in our joint savings. A payment I didn't recognize labeled consulting. An automatic withdrawal tied to an account I'd never seen. Then, something bigger. A portfolio investment opened under my name. The signature? Almost right, but not mine. I called the bank. Listened. Took notes. I stayed polite, calm. I didn't say his name. Not yet. 2 days later, I drove into town and bought a plain spiral notebook. I labeled it Recovery. Every tab had a purpose. Bank records, passwords, real estate deeds, even screenshots from Elise's social media. Her business registry listed our home address as its mailing location. I highlighted it in yellow. I called a lawyer. A woman named Dana. She had sharp eyes and a sharper tone. I found her through a friend of a friend. The kind of recommendation passed like a secret between women who have survived things. Her office smelled like leather and lavender. She wore her gray hair like a crown. And when I told her about the forged signature and the hidden account, she just nodded. My ex sold our house while I was visiting my mother in hospice, she said flatly. I didn't cry. I sued. I remember sitting there, stunned silent by her steel. She smiled. Just barely. Don't get even, she said, sliding a legal pad toward me. Get everything. I returned to Ridgewood without ceremony. No announcement. No arrival post. I signed a lease on a small apartment above a florist shop downtown. 2 rooms and a kitchenette with peeling linoleum. I loved it immediately. It smelled like eucalyptus and fresh paint and freedom. I repainted the walls myself. I didn't ask anyone's opinion. I didn't call my mother. I didn't need validation. I started attending divorce hearings in person. Daniel looked surprised the first time I showed up with Dana. I wore the navy suit he used to call too formal. I wore it with red lipstick. He tried to make small, talk in the hallway, something about how he was glad we could be adults about this. I looked him in the eye and said nothing. Let the silence speak. Let it build. Dana moved fast. We filed motions to freeze assets and subpoena account records. The investment account Daniel hid under my name? Illegal, fraudulent, traceable, Elise's business, non-compliant, using residential property for commercial operations, without disclosure, a zoning violation and a tax issue. I didn't gloat. I documented every forged signature, every altered file, every penny redirected behind my back. I had become a different version of myself. Not colder, just clearer. Like fog had lifted from everything I used to excuse. I worked freelance interior design projects again. Small ones. A nursery for a friend's. Baby. A cafe revamp. A bookshop rebrand. Nothing flashy, just the work. The kind that made me feel alive in my fingertips again. And at night, I walked by the lake near my apartment. The water never asked who I used to be. It only reflected what I was now. The real power didn't come from revenge. It came from the fact that they didn't know I was winning. Daniel still thought he'd managed a clean escape. Elise still posted, filtered brunch photos like the past had no fingerprints. But I didn't need to crash their dinner party or expose them on social media. I had the law. I had the truth. I had the woman I used to be. Rebuilt in quieter colors, steadier tones. And I had a court date. Everything I lost was documented. Everything they took was numbered, and everything I became, that couldn't be stolen. The courtroom smelled like recycled air and anxiety. I sat still, palms resting on the smooth leather of my portfolio, dressed in the cobalt blue sheath dress Daniel once said made me look too sharp to be approachable. That was the point. I didn't want to be approachable anymore. Dana sat beside me, flipping through our case file with the same calm you'd use assembling IKEA furniture. Organized, efficient, ruthless in her silence. Daniel arrived late. Elise clung to him like a shadow, her hair in some expensive-looking updo that didn't suit her. She wore white. Of course she did. He tried to catch my eye as he walked in. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. He looked older. Not in years, but in weight, the kind that drags a man down from the inside. The hearing began with procedural calm. Names, case numbers, confirmations. Then Dana stood. And methodically, without drama, tore down the world they'd built behind my back. Bank statements, tax, records. The forged documents Daniel had signed under my name, projected on the courtroom monitor in brutal, sterile resolution. Emails, screenshots, texts from Elise's phone. Even a voice memo, casually recorded, where Daniel mentioned moving a few things around so I'd get less in the settlement. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The weight of it all did the speaking for me. Elise sniffled once, dabbed her eye with a tissue. Her mascara didn't run. I wondered if it was waterproof, or if there was just nothing left inside her to spill. Daniel tried to interrupt once, claimed misunderstanding, miscommunication. The judge shut him down before he could finish his sentence. Then came the ruling. Premeditated financial abuse, forgery, asset concealment, intentional misrepresentation of marital funds. Every word another stone laid on their coffin. Joint assets? Frozen. The house? Returned to me. My grandmother's ring, listed as stolen property. She'd have to surrender it, Elise's business. Flagged for regulatory violation. Audited. Fined. Shut down pending further review. Daniel's real estate license was suspended pending ethics investigation. I didn't ask for that. But justice has a way of rolling downhill once momentum builds. The courtroom didn't erupt. It deflated. The kind of silence that arrives when everyone finally sees what they were pretending not to. As the judge adjourned, I gathered my things with the quiet precision of someone who had waited long enough. Elise avoided my gaze. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. I walked past them both. No eye contact, no words, because I didn't owe them closure. Silence, I've learned, is sometimes the most brutal sound in the world. 3 months later, The attic of the lakeside cabin was no longer full of dust and ghosts. It was my studio now. The yellow curtains still swayed gently in the breeze, but the walls were freshly painted, white with soft gray trim. A drafting table sat in one corner, a corkboard in another. Renderings and sketches pinned with copper tacks. Swatches hung like leaves pressed in a book. My portfolio had grown. Word of mouth, a few grateful clients, one small magazine feature. I wasn't building an empire. I was building something mine. One afternoon, a client came by to pick up a custom vision board. A kind woman named Celia, divorced, newly single, trying to make her own house feel like a home again. She looked around the studio, taking it all in. "This space," she said, "feels like it was born from something." I smiled, placing the folder in her hands. "It was," I said. "It was born from letting go." She paused. "Is this what got you back into interiors?" And I said it softly, but without hesitation. Closure. Sometimes I still find reminders. A loose thread from the robe Elise wore. A chipped mug from the set. Daniel never replaced. Old photographs that still live in one unburned box. But they don't hurt anymore. They just echo. And I am no longer an empty house where others come to rest. I am the architect of my own peace now. The kind that doesn't beg to be earned, only designed, lived in, and fiercely protected.